welcome. This is another Insight Conversation. I'm Ian Cohen, the founder of Terra, the instructional management platform for K-12 schools. And we are here as part of an Insight Conversation for the ATL Education Expo with Jeff Harrell, got it, who is a specially designed instruction coach or SDI coach for Fulton County schools, specifically works with a lot of special educators. And today we're going to talk all about his background and what he's learned along the way, and also get his ideas about what the future of education should look like, especially from this angle within K-12. First and foremost, thank you, Jeff, for being with us. We appreciate your time.
Thank you, man. I really appreciate bringing me into this.
Yeah, it's going to be great. I'm excited to hear your story. So why don't we start with that? Just give us a little bit of a background, like how did you get into education, and specifically, what are the different roles or places you've worked in Atlanta? What's that experience been like?
Yeah, I originally got into education after I got out of the Air Force. I kind of felt it was something I wanted to do to continue working with different people and being involved in the community. And I think education gives you the best outlet for that. I haven't always been in Atlanta. Originally, I was over near Athens in Oconee County, but I've been in Atlanta for the last couple of years. And I would say that being in this area helps you kind of see the diversity in education, helps you explore the different avenues of education, the different mindsets.
Sure.
I think that, you know, it's a good place to see growth and change, you know, in education.
Yeah, for sure. I want to ask you about the Air Force. So what was your background before education, and what was that transition from the military into public education like? How different or how similar might they be? I don't know. Maybe they're similar.
Yeah, I would say when I was a younger teacher, so I taught in Greenville, South Carolina. I forgot about that too. So that was my first job. When I was a younger teacher, I think I was first transitioning in. I think maybe, I don't want to say it was difficult really, but it was interesting to kind of have some autonomy in like your space, right? So like I was in charge of the classroom. I had these 14 to 20 individuals that I was responsible for. And so that was new, you know, but then similarities in the same, you know, I have a hierarchy of people I'm responsible to, you know, the principal leading the school, superintendent, you know, being that general, I guess, of the school system.
Yeah, for sure.
So, you know, there are still those commonalities, but I would say overall, the biggest commonality is the fact that you're a team and you have a common goal and you're working towards improvement and betterment of other people. And that's in a leadership and management role. So that's been kind of my experiences now that I'm in more of a leadership out of the classroom role. It's like, okay, I'm really seeing these similar aspects that between the two, like, because I'm still in the National Guard. So, you know, I still have that role as well. So yeah, that's where I kind of see a lot of things like the leadership skills come into play.
Yeah, absolutely. That makes a lot of sense. And incredible you're still in National Guard too. Thank you for that. Every single teacher and educator I talk to in these conversations is always doing at least one other thing that could easily be their
Gotta have a side hustle, man.
Yeah. That's a whole topic that needs to be broken down because it's both a great thing and a problem. So with that though, you started in the classroom, and have you been in special education this whole time?
Yes, I've been in special education.
Okay, what led to that path for you? And then can you tell us about, you know, how that experience, especially in the beginning, was for you, especially for those folks? Because a lot of, you know, I was a 9th and 10th grade teacher, so I had inclusion classes where we had a special education roster and a co-teacher, but beyond that, you know, I was never solely responsible for a caseload of students in that way. So I'd love to hear a little bit more about that.
Yeah, so in South Carolina, it was small group classes, so it wasn't an inclusion. I was with the same kids all day, and so that was really interesting because that was my first experience in special ed. Like a lot of teachers that get involved with special ed, that wasn't always their background. You know, my undergrad was history. I got a master's in education. I think maybe I had a couple, like, I don't even want to say courses, but introductions to special education. So
Yeah.
it was really a crash course. They're like, hey, write this IEP, and I'm like, what's that? So,
Yeah.
so like,
Right.
can I get some training on this? No, okay, all right, I'll figure it out. So, that experience, and then moving into my school system in Oconee, that kind of continued into like, hey, I need some support in these things, right? I
Yeah.
really need someone to help me out. And it's not that I'm not trying to do it. I'll be honest, I don't have the background. I need that
Right.
support. And so, that experience alone has been pushed me to coaching, because I know that I would have loved to have a coach, just someone there to kind of support me, help me along the way, build me up, let me know if I'm not doing this right, and kind of push me in the next direction. Because at the end of the day, if I don't know what I'm doing, I'm not serving my students appropriately. And I think that's where we see kind of that gap grow. And it's no fault to the teachers, really. It's that maybe the supports aren't in place for that teacher, so then they know exactly what the supports are they need for the student. So that's been kind of my journey of, hitting a rocky road, but using that as like my motivation as I continue every day.
Yeah, it seems to be a common refrain for those of us who've gone into the classroom where you end up in a position where you want more support, it isn't there, and it's in large part not due to any specific individuals who are like neglecting you. It's more of just the structures get in the way of giving you what you need, and that keeps coming up in all these conversations. It's like it's the structures and not the people. And so I'm curious, before we get into how you're transitioned into coaching, were there any lessons learned from being a classroom teacher in special education that you could share with us, especially in given where we are today with COVID? Like, what are common things that you notice that people maybe don't understand, or things that you just learned that you did not know or do right the first time?
Yeah, I think from the special education background or perspective, it's understanding who the student is.
Mhm.
Like, why is there a barrier for that student to engage in a general ed curriculum? Why are they in this least restrictive environment? And really digging deep into that to get a good understanding of the student, so then I can align my practices and my strategies to help that student in those areas. And not just the areas of need, but those areas of strength. So
Right.
I know the student is doing really well in this area. So how can I leverage that to support those areas the student needs to grow? I'd say that's a big piece. Just who is this child that's in my classroom, and how can I best serve them? I think the second piece is relationships with your colleagues. I think that goes a very long way. Um, you know, are we all working towards the same goal? Do we all have the same in picture in mind? And if that's not the same, then those relationships aren't going to grow. The culture is going to fall apart. So are we all there for the same reason and speaking the same language?
Yeah, that's a great point. It's one of the things that I have thought about recently because of these conversations. Is like we rarely, at least as teachers, sit down with each other and define what success looks like, right? Like we know we want them to be
Yeah.
successful on assessments, and I think that's just sort of assumed that's the end goal. But in special education, especially with IEPs, y'all definitely have to think more thoroughly through it, right, and really detail it out. How do you go about that process? Is it literally just sitting down and talking through it with each of the teachers that supports that student?
Yeah, it's starting from the student's psych and looking at what the determination was for them to receive special education services,
Right.
looking at some historical assessment data as well as classroom data, and looking at kind of that quantifiable data, but then also bringing in, what are the teachers seeing in the classroom? What are things that are working for the student? But you kind of hit it on the head. Getting together and having that communication. And there's barriers in our world that prevent that from happening. So I think the goal is to find what are the solutions to those barriers so we can have these these communities that are working together to identify the student and choose the best practices for them.
Yeah, I'd love to hear about what some of those barriers are because I definitely, what's interesting is that special education, you all have been doing personalized learning for a long time. And now personalized learning as a broad sort of generic term is really like in vogue, and it's what a lot of people are trying to push for in some models. And it's like, well, probably want to start by talking to special educators who have been doing this stuff in earnest for a while. But how have you, like, what are some of the barriers you found to collaborating with your colleagues or even just having an opportunity to set those goals together?
Yeah, so opportunity kind of hits on the first one is the time to make those happen. Barriers, time is always a barrier, and sometimes time's a real barrier or time is a perceived barrier. So I think that's something that can be examined further. Like our schedules aligning where that conversation can happen.
Right.
And being a teacher in high school, you often have a lot of additional duties. You're coaching, you're in the halls, you're doing a lot of other things, and
Right.
I'm sure
Right.
other K-12 teachers do the same thing. So time is a barrier. I hit on relationships earlier. I think different personalities are a barrier. So you might have different ideas of what success looks like in your classroom. You might
Sure.
have different ideas of what teaching the standard looks like in the classroom. Might have different ideas of what strategies will work. And sometimes those perceptions, personalities come from, different ages, different levels of experience.
Yep.
So there's definitely things that are barriers. I kind of go back to the beginning. Sometimes barriers are perceived, and it just takes us having a conversation and meeting together one time, and then we can figure it out moving forward.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, especially because I mean, you consider teaching is so much about who the person who's doing the teaching is too, and what their background is, and their style and personality, and it's funny because when you lay it out, it's like we jam pack school days to the brim with instructional time and then other obligations, and there rarely is time to actually just sit down and have a non like time constrained conversation with a colleague about certain students or styles or defining success, whatever it is. I always felt that pressure myself too. And I think that probably resonates with pretty much everybody out there. It makes you wonder what would happen if we tried to pull back a little bit on the how much emphasis we put on seat time and give a little bit of more of that time to the instructors. Because I know for me, if I had a little bit more time just to collaborate, each one of my lessons, maybe if I had fewer of them, they'd still be better and more engaging, more effective in all likelihood, right?
Yeah. Yep.
So can you tell me about, so you've transitioned to this coaching role, which is really cool. And I also know it's a relatively new program that they're trying in Fulton County. I also say coaching in general seems like it's really gotten a lot of steam over the last 10 years or so,
Yeah.
which is, I think is amazing, even though I didn't have a lot of coaching myself. And I don't know if I was the most coachable person either, but it's certainly a valuable support as you laid out in the beginning. So I'd love to hear how and why did you make that transition to coaching? And then what are some of the different skills you've had to learn as a coach versus being an actual instructor?
Yeah, I think the how and why it goes back to what I was discussing earlier. It's just I felt it as a need. So when the opportunity presented myself, I wanted to kind of jump in there and be the solution to that need that I felt, because I thought that was my next step to make a difference in education. The skills, honestly, there's a lot of skills I think needed in coaching because you're an adult working with another adult,
Right.
and the way adults learn, the way adults engage is very different than what you might be doing in a classroom. There are similarities, but there's also some differences. So I think just the skill of conversation, building a relationship.
Yep.
Yeah, I've probably said a relationship 3 or 4 times now. I really think that is a very valuable thing when you're supporting a teacher. this day and age, right?
Yeah.
Um, and then understanding that teacher's perspective, just like a lot of our students come from all different backgrounds, adults or just grown-up kids, right? They still have the same, all different backgrounds.
Right.
So keeping that in mind when you go into like a coaching action, you know, not being the one that feels like you have to go in there and dictate, but allowing that teacher to bring their own personal experiences into a conversation and drive the conversation. And I think the other skill that helps with that is reflection. That was a big goal and growth for mine last year, is taking a step back, analyzing what just happened, and being really honest with yourself. It's easy to walk out of a coaching action and beat yourself up, or walk out of one and think you did a great, but it's actually taking the time and like dissecting it and learning and growing and improving.
Right.
And then getting feedback, because you know, sometimes as leaders, we like to give feedback, but we're not always willing to receive it. So that upward feedback and using that in your reflections has been really helpful.
Yeah. I'm curious, like what sort of training or supports did you receive on being a good coach as you transition to that role? Because I mean, we've all, I think, probably experienced, whether you're an athlete or just had coaching before in any sort of setting, it's not like it is a skill. You have to get good at working with other people, helping to break down like barriers so that they can really receive your feedback and understand where you're coming from, and also do it in such a way that isn't you know, punitive or like negative, but is productive and constructive. So I'm curious, like, what preparation did you get as you transitioned to that role? And then is there any specific like technique or skill that you learned in this first couple of years that are like, yeah, this is a big thing that I had to change really quickly?
Yeah, I have felt very supported through my growth in coaching and initial training. And it goes back to just learning what a coach is and not just jumping in day one trying to coach. So I would say my first year, it wasn't focused on so much go in there and change these things, make these changes. It was more focused on, hey, how do you build a relationship with the people you're about to work with?
Yep.
How do you get buy-in? How do you fit yourself into the culture of that school? And then how do you go through a coaching cycle or a coaching action with a teacher where it's like you said, it's not evaluative, it's not punitive, it's not a judgment, but it's a conversation that you guys come out at the end with this common picture of success, right?
Yep.
And I think that's where it really goes into coaching is about empowering teachers to have a voice and empowering them to be reflective and not always, hey, you need to do this and this is the way to do it.
Yeah. Yeah, because you mentioned reflection, and it is such an important skill. It's an important skill that our students should have. I mean, any person should have, and it's even something that we focus on too in my team. And I'm curious if there's a process y'all use for reflection that helps with that, because in all of this, like the idea of teacher growth is not something you hear a ton about. Like we hear a lot about evaluations, we hear a lot about teacher retention, but I've always thought that making sure that teachers feel like and are growing is one of the ways to keep them around. I mean, special educators, there are shortages of special educators in, I think, 48 states right now. So obviously we need to keep more of them around. And I think growth is something that needs to be focused on. It sounds like through the coaching style and emphasis on reflection that you guys have, that's something you focus on.
Yeah, I think the technique that you're asking about is, called cognitive coaching. So you're like working with teachers to become thoughtful of their processes. It's not so much always, like I said, it's not telling, it's walking them through a reflection of what just occurred and asking questions, engaging them with questions and not I shouldn't be talking like the teachers should be talking. I
Right.
should be listening. And I think that's a big skill in coaching as well, is listening. That's another growth I've been trying to work on this year. I read a book my supervisor gave me called The Advice Monster, because so many times coaches go into these coaching actions and coaching cycles with, oh, we already know the solution, we already know the
Right.
problem. But it's really like taming that advice monster, sitting back, listening, asking questions like, hey, what was your challenge here? And helping that teacher find their challenge. So then they feel they have a voice in it. They're actually working towards something they want to grow in, and not something that you've laid out for them. And of course, you use like your common school's goals as a guide.
Sure.
So you keep those buffers in there, but again, allowing them to navigate through that with their own voice is super helpful.
Yeah.
Um,
When I was my second year of teaching, I was like 23, 24. And for some reason, my school, I had a good first year in that the kids didn't, destroy me, and they got, they liked me at the end of it. But I ended up getting a student teacher in my second year, which was wild. Anybody who's working in school is like, a student teacher is an amazing resource to have. And me, like the new kid on the block, was the one they assigned her to, and she was older than me. She was amazing, really sweet, and still, getting her master's. And I had no idea what I was doing. I barely knew how to teach myself. So my coaching was all advice monster, period. Like, that's all it was, because that's what the kind of coaching I had received. Now, that I'm a little bit more experienced professional, I very much understand a lot of the nuance and importance of sitting back and letting people arrive at conclusions in their own mind, and just using probing as the way to get there. But I just remember that, and I feel horrible to this day about that. And I think some of this coaching skills, like, we can teach teachers to be like that for each other too within their departments. It doesn't even have to be formal; it can be very informal.
yeah, I think that's my end goal. My personal end goal for coaching is the fact that I can be in a building and then kind of just fade away, right? Because
Right.
we as a team have established the community of support, of of discussion, of professionalism, where those conversations that I'm facilitating now become facilitated with by other teachers. They're engaging,
Right.
and that's when you see that. That's when you're like, okay, we're growing, we're moving forward. You're
Yeah.
challenging each other. This is beautiful.
Yeah, exactly. I recently read a book about Netflix and their culture. And Netflix is really, like, renowned for their culture. It's very different. It's very, very big on feedback, like candor and feedback. And the author co-authored it with the founder of Netflix. And she noted at the end of the book that she followed Reed Hastings, the founder, around for an entire day at Netflix, and realized that he never once made a decision himself the entire day. Everybody he sat down with, they were the ones who were presenting and problem solving and making decisions. He was just there to help kind of guide them forward. And it's because they've established a culture where people have that self-awareness and also have that autonomy to really, like, go through these processes and make their own decisions. I feel like we need more of that kind of thinking in schools.
Yeah, I think you hit it with autonomy, allowing those teachers to know who their students are, and use that data to make their decisions. Because they're the ones that are in there every day, working
Right.
with students. And I think if we can give them the mindset of, hey, not every kid that walks through your door is the same, so not everything you lay out is going to be the same, and allow them to say, okay, well, I know this kid just needs this student has this going on, so let me structure my lesson that way. And hey, man, if they can do that and uh, produce the evidence of growth, I think that's where we can be successful and say, hey, if we're seeing growth, that's a beautiful thing.
Yeah, definitely. Now that we've been talking about this, I think a lot of people say when you start teaching, you're kind of thrown into the fire. I don't know if that's the best metaphor because it's not really something anybody can think of and resonate with. But I think more of, like, it's like learning how to swim while swimming for the first time. Like, doggy paddling, you're trying to keep it up, and eventually like you can adjust and learn strokes along the way, but you got to keep doing it because every day you're back in there and you got to make it work somehow, right? So with that, I want to transition to our final question. You've been in the classroom, now you're in a coaching setting. You've taught in South Carolina, now you're here in Atlanta, and we're happy to have you. Thank you for being here. But as you think ahead, we're really trying to get folks to think like great educators do. Let's backwards plan here. What do you think in the year 2050, so about 30 years from now, what do you think education should look like? And we could talk broad strokes. We don't need like, yeah, all the kids should be on hovercrafts or something weird like that. I don't know why that would be something we'd want, but
well, that was my first thing, so I guess I can't do
right.
that.
Hoverboard. So what do you think? What do you think education should look like at that point in time? Hopefully.
Yeah, well, I think the conversation we had earlier or previously, we talked about how this is the time that we could really see some change. We're in a period of as one author put it, they said that this is a period where we can, make a change, try new things, fail, but it's okay because we're trying new things, and that's what needs to happen in this time surrounding a pandemic where education is not the traditional way.
Right.
I'll get to your question in a second, but like doing some past reflection, we haven't seen much change in education in 50 years. So the pessimistic, unfortunate realism is maybe it won't change. That's not what I'm going to say, but if you look at our historical back, that's what it could be. Sure, we throw a computer and a projector or a smart board in there and we say we're doing something new, but we're not.
Right.
I think there are some schools, especially in our area in Atlanta, that are doing new things. And that's where the change is going to come from. Those people that are willing to push the status quo, those people that are willing to challenge what's already happening and try something new, that are unforgiving with challenging the standards that are written because they don't fit the people we serve, right? And so that's what I would hope to see changed in 30 years, is that we challenge what we've been doing for our students, because that's the ultimate prize, right? That our students see themselves in what they're learning, that, oh, okay, I can make a connection with this. It's not the same old repetitive content we've had. So that's the first thing I would love to see, and I hope to see, is that, and I feel like we are seeing it a little bit just within the last year of that. I would also like to see what we talked about, some teacher autonomy where they can make those decisions and change the classroom, where the classroom isn't a four square walls, or a classroom is anywhere. We've learned through this pandemic that the virtual environment is great for some kids.
Sure.
They are thriving. Some aren't, but I think when you look at that, you got to ask why. What are we doing that is different? Are they not thriving because I'm still teaching the same way in the virtual setting as I was in the traditional setting? Right. Yeah, maybe. So I would like to see this concept of I come to a building every day for 8 hours and I sit through 7 classes and I eat lunch when this bell rings change. Because in no way are you preparing a student for independence, for self-growth, for self-reflection when you're dictating their whole day in that way. And 8 hours. I'm a big fan of 3-day weeks. I'm a big fan of not sitting through something for 8 hours.
Yeah, sure.
And the other thing that I've really kind of jumped on board with the last few years, working through my doctoral program, is the idea of assessments, reflecting on our assessments and what they really mean. I think the concept of our grading system could be definitely reviewed and changed to where we're not saying, or maybe where we're taking the bias out of it. That's what I would like to see, because we all know that that's the reality. Standardized testing and classroom assessments, there can definitely be some bias in there. So how are we as a team coming together and looking at the assessments we're providing and see if they're actually measuring students' growth versus recall or memorization or whatever
Right.
it is that we are doing.
Yeah, no, I think those are all amazing points. And if nothing else, we need to find a way to get the system to be a little bit more dynamic and adaptable, right?
Yeah.
Because to your point, like the structures have not changed in 50 years, might be generous. I honestly, in 100 years, they haven't changed all that much. And everybody knows this. That's the thing.
Yeah.
Everybody knows this. You talk to any teacher, any school leader, you get them outside of the building and you sit them down, like have a drink or over coffee. And it's like, we all are here and we know this. And so I think it's just incumbent upon us to try to come together and start making the changes now. And it sounds like with this coaching program y'all have, you're definitely doing some of that. So once again, thank you so much, Jeff. We really appreciate you here and also the work that you do in Fulton County. And we appreciate you sharing your perspective today.
Yeah, I appreciate being here and the people that kind of helped support me to get here. I could not have talked about any of this 5 years ago, so I definitely have had a lot of support along the way. So
yeah,
appreciate you.
You're extremely knowledgeable. I always learn something when we talk. I honestly do. But thank you, and we're excited to share this with folks at the expo.
All right, see y'all.